It didn't feel like any ordinary morning in that courtroom. You could hear the echo of polished shoes hitting marble floors like clockwork, a rhythm that somehow felt heavier than usual. Dozens of reporters shuffled papers, whispering with nervous urgency. Every few seconds, their eyes darted toward the side door, waiting, anticipating. The air felt charged, like static building before a thunderstorm. A clerk nudged his glasses into place. The judge scanned a stack of notes beneath the flickering buzz of cold fluorescent light. And the jury, silent, still impossible to read, was already seated, their eyes forward, their thoughts locked away. Then the double doors opened quietly, and Shawn Diddy Combs stepped into the room. But he didn't walk in like a mogul. Not like the man who ran clubs, who flipped real estate, who stitched his name into music history and luxury fashion. He entered like a man who hadn't closed his eyes in days. His gaze moved across the courtroom but didn't land on anyone. He wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, every seam flawless. But no cut of fabric could hide what churned beneath his skin. Each step toward the defense table was deliberate, measured, like he was walking into a memory that would rewrite itself, no matter how many times he tried to forget. The whispers in the gallery were barely audible, but they were there. Former insiders, people with history, faces from behind the curtain. Some wore hats low, others sunglasses high, pretending not to be seen, and still the room buzzed with anticipation. The judge's gavel struck the bench, once, louder than it needed to be. The charges, at least on paper, were a complex spider web. But at the core, the question was razor sharp. Did Shawn Combs, behind the illusion of power and money, cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed? And if he did, would this be the moment the truth finally stepped into the light? A clerk began reading the official case summary, but the words felt disorienting, almost dreamlike. Diddy didn't flinch. He sat, hands neatly folded, occasionally shifting his glance toward his attorney, who leaned over and murmured something. Too low to catch. Diddy didn't nod, didn't react. He just stared straight ahead, like he was reciting a story only he knew and no one else would believe. Before we go any deeper into this harrowing trial, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. You won't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get back to the courtroom. The prosecutor stood, a woman with a reputation for burning down white-collar crime and stripping power from corrupt elites brick by brick. She didn't pace, didn't raise her voice. Instead, with a calm that chilled the room, she began weaving a story. A timeline that stretched across tour buses, private airstrips in the middle of nowhere, flickering surveillance footage from forgotten years, and testimonies from voices that had stayed quiet for far too long. The jury leaned in, motionless. Every line from her mouth sliced clean through the courtroom like a scalpel against glass. She talked of fear, of influence, of decisions made in rooms where cameras were banned and memories were bought. And then she ended with a line so frigid it left breath visible in the air. "We're not here to destroy a legacy," she said. "We're here to reveal what that legacy cost." Diddy's jaw tensed. It was a tiny twitch, a flicker, a buried emotion crawling its way to the surface. But whether it was rage, regret, or resistance, no one could tell. What everyone knew in that moment, though, was this. This wasn't going to be a trial about broken deals or paperwork discrepancies. This was going to be a war, and the first shot had just been fired. Silence clamped down on the courtroom like a vice. Not a breath. Not a shuffle. Even the judge leaned back, watching Diddy with the caution of a man staring into a storm before it breaks. Then the first witness entered, from the far side of the room, escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals. Tall, built like a wall, clear-framed, glasses hiding haunted eyes. His skin looked drained, his face unreadable. And once, not long ago, he was the man closest to Diddy, his bodyguard, his shield, his shadow. The room held its breath as he raised his hand, took the oath, and sat. Down. The prosecutor stepped forward. How long did you work for Mr. Combs? 6 years, the man replied, his voice flat, cold, like gravel beneath wheels. What was your role during that time? I was in charge of transportation, security, coordination during tour, and confidential business arrangements. That last part hung in the air, like a blade. Clarify that for the court, the prosecutor asked. He shifted slightly. Meetings that weren't listed. Not on any calendar. Events I was told to forget before they happened. Chairs creaked across the gallery as people leaned in, straining to hear. Diddy didn't move, but his hand gripped the defense table so tightly the veins on his wrist pulsed beneath his skin. The bodyguard described a night. Late 2016, a snowstorm had frozen most travel across the Northeast. Planes grounded, roads closed, but Diddy, he had to be in Manhattan by to a .m. No questions, no delays. A private car was arranged. Under a fake ride-share alias, a briefcase sat waiting. In the back seat, no explanation, just a directive, get it into the room. And don't let anyone follow. What happened in that room? She asked. The witness looked down. 3 men went in, he said. A pause. 1 came out. Gasps rattled the gallery. The judge slammed the gavel. Order in the court. The jury shifted, visibly shaken. A voice whispered, "No way." Another pen scribbled furiously across a notepad. Diddy remained still. His lawyer leaned in, whispered, fast, urgently, but still no objection. Not yet. The witness continued. He described seeing Diddy pacing the hotel lobby at 2:30 a.m., wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, checking behind him every few seconds. He kept saying something to himself. The man recalled. What was it? The prosecutor asked. He hesitated, then answered, "This can't blow back, over and over." That's all he said. Did you report what you saw? He exhaled. No. Why not? The man looked at the jury. Because the last time I even thought about it, someone I knew disappeared. No warning. I took the message. The courtroom wasn't just tense anymore. It was alive. The judge looked visibly disturbed. The court. Stenographer's fingers flew without pause. The defense still hadn't said a word. Not yet. They were waiting. Everyone knew it, but the people watching from inside the gallery to behind millions of phone screens weren't waiting anymore. They were witnessing the unraveling of a legend, thread by thread, and the first thread had just snapped. Then the defense stood. Slowly. Diddy single quotes S lead counsel. A man with a reputation for disarming federal witnesses like a surgeon wielding steel, calm, calculated. He buttoned his jacket and stepped toward the witness. The tension turned razor sharp. You mentioned a briefcase, he said, voice calm. Did you open it? No, so you don't know what was inside. No, were you told to open it? No, I was told not to. And who gave that order? Mr. Combs. But just now, you said he never said what was in it, right? Right. Then how do you know it contained anything criminal? The bodyguard shifted. I didn't say it did. You implied it. Objection. The attorney called. Sustained, the judge replied. Jury will disregard that last statement. The balance in the room shifted. Suddenly, the defense smelled blood. The attorney adjusted his tie. Pulled out a printed interview. Do you recall this? He asked. Yes. In this 2019 interview with The Source, you said, and I quote, Diddy treated me like family. I'd take a bullet for that man. Sound familiar? The witness stayed silent, and here he flipped a page. I never saw him cross a line, not once. People talk, but they don't know the real Diddy. You said that? Yes. Now, years later after your employment ended, and after certain civil suits surfaced, you're suddenly claiming he orchestrated a secret meeting where 2 men didn't walk out. The man hesitated. I'm telling the truth, or telling a version that pays better. The attorney asked. You've sold interviews, haven't you? A few books, podcasts. Some discussions, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the attorney turned to the jury. Credibility is everything. If a man sells one truth for a check and another for a headline, ask yourself, which is the truth and which is just for sale? The gallery stirred. Even the prosecutor's arms folded tighter. The momentum was changing. Diddy stayed still, but for the first time that day he closed his eyes. The judge called for a recess. The witness left under escort, shoulders hunched, smaller now, somehow. The jury followed, slower this time. Some looked uncertain. One older woman, maybe in her 60s, shook her head. Lips pressed tight, and as the court began to reset, the prosecution regrouping, the defense silent but focused. Shawn Diddy Combs sat like stone. Still. Unmoving. Outside. The press was in a frenzy. Inside. The war was just beginning. And nobody could say for sure who would bleed first. Diddy Combs didn't move, not a twitch, not a breath. He sat there like a statue carved from pressure and silence, while outside, the media storm was thundering through streets, screens, and social feeds. Inside the courtroom, it was only just beginning, and no one, not the attorneys, not the jury, not even Diddy himself, could guess who would draw blood first. When court resumed, something was different, not in temperature, not in light, but in air. In gravity. The energy had shifted. You could feel it in your skin. The jury looked sharper now, less passive, more cautious. The gallery wasn't just observing anymore. It had transformed. No longer an audience, but something between a crowd at a funeral and the front row of a boxing match. What happened next? No one saw it coming. The side door opened, and a woman stepped in, navy blue pantsuit. Mid-40s, no makeup, beyond what was absolutely necessary. Her expression didn't ask for sympathy, and it didn't offer any either. She moved with the calm of someone who had already accepted whatever fallout her truth might bring. She had been one of the most mysterious names in Diddy's orbit. Not a lover, not a business partner. Something far more dangerous. A witness with no reason to lie and nothing left to lose. She took the oath and sat with a stillness that didn't come from peace. It came from carrying something too heavy for too long. State your name, the prosecutor said. She did. Your relationship to Mr. Combs. I was employed as a compliance advisor for one of his shell corporations, she answered. 2014 to 2019. The room blinked. Not gasped, not murmured, just blinked, as if trying to process the weight of what had just been said. During your employment? The prosecutor asked. Did you witness anything you believed to be unlawful? She didn't flinch. Double quotes, yes. Can you elaborate? A slow nod. I was ordered to sign off on financial documents that made no legal or mathematical sense, transfers to corporations that didn't exist the week before. Monthly payouts to entities with no offices, no staff. Invoices for services never rendered. Who gave you these orders? She turned just slightly toward the defense table. Mr. Combs. The words hit like a shattering window. The defense didn't react, but a tremor passed through their row. A tiny ripple, like a disturbance under the skin. Diddy's lips parted? Barely. No words came. Did you retain any records? The prosecutor asked. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a folder, handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He flipped through the pages for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. These documents, she said, show movement of funds across 5 countries. Some of the routing numbers match open investigations by international banking watchdogs. The jury stared. One man leaned back slowly, arms crossed, jaw tightening. A younger woman wrote so fast her pen nearly flew from her hand. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The prosecutor asked. The woman kept her eyes forward. Because I was warned. By whom? She didn't hesitate. Someone very close. To Mr. Combs, he said, and I quote, "We know where your mother lives." Don't get curious. Gasps rippled. The judge didn't even reach for the gavel this time. He just sat there watching, lips pressed into a straight line. The defense stood quickly. "Objection, hearsay, sustained," the judge said. But it was too late. Everyone had heard it, and no one could unhear it. The prosecutor stepped forward. "If this court were to subpoena your private communications, would those threats be documented?" "Yes. I never deleted anything. Emails, voicemails, even doorbell footage. It's all preserved." And just like that, the foundation under the defense shifted. Diddy moved for the first time since she took the stand. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands pressed against his temples. It was subtle, but it was noticed. The witness looked at him, not with fury, not even with sadness. Just the kind of look you give someone who used to have power over you and doesn't anymore. Outside the courthouse, the sidewalks had become a storm of cameras and speculation. Inside, you could hear your own pulse. And what was clear now, unequivocally clear, was that this trial wasn't about who Shawn Combs used to be. It was about what he may have done, and who was finally brave enough to say it out loud. When court reconvened after lunch, something was visibly different. The new U.S. Marshals had taken positions by the doors. Their eyes never stopped scanning. They weren't just maintaining order. They were expecting something. The jury filed back in, still quiet, but charged. Like a current passed between them, the prosecution didn't waste a moment. A tall man entered from the back, three-piece suit, no briefcase, no laptop, just a notebook, small, leather-bound, and a presence that changed the oxygen in the room. He wasn't introduced by name, just by role. Forensic financial analyst, contracted by the state, the prosecutor said, tasked with independently auditing over 40 accounts connected to the defendant. He raised his hand, swore in, took the stand, and then he opened the notebook. The defense immediately called for a sidebar. There were whispers, quick and sharp, but the judge shook his head. "He's been pre-approved. Proceed." The analyst began without drama. "I was not told the identity of the person under investigation. All account numbers were anonymized until the audit was complete." His task had been simple: trace all movement, flag anything irregular. What he found was astonishing. Large screens were wheeled in. He began walking the jury through a digital map of transactions that, on the surface, looked routine, but when plotted by time, size, and pattern, they revealed something else entirely. In under 10 minutes, the room had been shown millions of dollars moving through companies that seemed legitimate but collapsed just weeks or even days after FORMING PO boxes as office addresses, names registered to people who didn't exist. Then he stopped at a specific transfer to $0.3 million. This payment, he said, originated from an entity labeled as an entertainment consulting firm, but there is no record of employees, no website, no listed headquarters. Its employer identification number is identical to a dissolved nonprofit out of Atlanta. Silence. He continued. 3 wire transfers matched exactly date and value with testimony given earlier by the compliance officer. Then came the drop. All 3 ultimately funneled into a single offshore account, he said. British Virgin Islands, held by a trust and the named beneficiary. He looked at the jury, Shawn John Combs. You could feel the floor shift. Not suspicion now. Something worse. Betrayal. The defense didn't flinch, but they didn't speak either. And in that silence, something unspoken screamed. Cross-examination began. The defense argued shell companies weren't illegal, that trusts were standard tools for high-net-worth individuals. The analyst didn't even blink. It's not that shell companies exist, he said. It's that they fold perfectly days before mandatory reporting. That the money always flows to the same place. That every trail, no matter where it starts, ends at one name. The jury took notes like they were running out of time. Someone in the back let out a breath too loudly. Nobody called it out. The air was too thick to speak. The analyst closed his notebook. Didn't look at Diddy, didn't look at the gallery, just walked out with the same quiet confidence he entered with and in his wake. It felt like the floor beneath the case had begun to collapse. No one expected another witness so soon, but they brought one in, a man no one had seen in years, a limp, graying hair, and a face worn down by time and regret. He was introduced as a former logistics coordinator for one of Diddy's defunct tour companies. Flown in from out of state. And he had one thing no one else did: knowledge of the gray room. Just hearing the name shifted the room. Reporters reached for their phones, though few dared move. The gray room had long been industry folklore. A secret space buried beneath Diddy's LA recording studio. A myth. Until now, the witness spoke low, careful. There was a room below the studio, not on blueprints, accessed by a back freight elevator. 2 codes, changed weekly. Who had the codes? The prosecutor asked Mr. Combs and 2 others. I won't name them unless ordered. Did you enter the room? Twice. I wasn't supposed to, but I had emergency maintenance clearance. What did you see? He swallowed. There were cameras. Always recording. No studio equipment. Just furniture that didn't belong. Blackout walls. Dim lighting. And a wall safe. What was in the safe? One time it was open. I saw envelopes, flash drives, and a revolver. The word hit like thunder. Were any of the envelopes labeled? Yes. One said 2013 Vegas. Another said Embassy Emergency. The defense objected. Unverified, sensational, irrelevant, but the prosecution pressed forward. If that room was used to intimidate, silence, or manipulate, the prosecutor argued, then it is absolutely relevant. The judge allowed it. Barely. The witness continued. He was once ordered to dispose of a damaged hard drive from that room. He took it to be destroyed, but first he made a copy. It had already been turned over to investigators. The courtroom inhaled as one. The defense tried to poke holes. Was he angry? Paid off? Looking for attention? He shook his head. I stayed silent for years. I don't want attention. I just want to stop carrying this. Diddy clenched his jaw. One hand locked under the table. Then came the question. In your opinion, was the gray room created for legal business activity? The witness looked down. No, he said. It was built for leverage, for control. The judge called a recess, but no one moved. They just sat there. Like survivors after a quake. And somewhere in the back, a voice whispered, they're not burying this. Not this time. And maybe for the first time in his life, Shawn Combs knew they were right. Shawn Diddy Combs looked like a man who finally realized the world was hearing the things he'd spent a lifetime burying. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet, not the silence of calm, but the kind that presses down on your ribs, makes your breath shallow, your pulse sharp. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. The jury, the gallery, even the court security guards who'd stood like statues since day one now watched more closely, sensing a crack in the surface. When the judge returned from chambers, he looked changed, older, drained, as if what had been unfolding inside those 4 walls was aging him in real time. All rise, the bailiff called, but the words barely sliced through the tension. The judge sat. He didn't waste time. Before we proceed, he said, scanning both sides, new information has been submitted under seal. We'll be pausing direct testimony to review this matter in chambers. Jurors remain seated until further notice. The prosecution immediately stood. Your Honor, we request a sidebar private. He nodded. What followed was 15 minutes of whispered chaos behind closed doors. The jury stayed put, confused. Reporters shifted in their seats, pens poised. Phones buzzed silently like ticking clocks. Diddy sat still, his face unreadable, but beneath the table, his left foot betrayed him. It tapped non-stop, fast, sharp, mechanical. A rhythm of unraveling. When the judge reemerged, his expression was pale and tight. We're proceeding, he said flatly. Court remains in session. The prosecution didn't call a witness. Instead, they handed over a flash drive sealed and requested an FBI forensic analyst be cleared to interpret its contents in the next session. The judge approved, but the explosion came minutes after adjournment. A leak. One headline. Leaked audio. Diddy allegedly caught threatening witness weeks before trial. The courtroom didn't just react, it detonated. The judge was informed. Security swarmed. Jurors were escorted out under federal protection. Court was cleared for the day, but inside those sealed doors, both legal teams knew this wasn't just financial anymore. It wasn't about paperwork or whispers. It was about intimidation, tampering, obstruction. And suddenly, this wasn't a courtroom drama, it was a federal disaster. Back in the hallway, Diddy was led out a side exit. His sunglasses were back on, his expression tight, but if you looked close, you could see the pressure mounting. The mask cracking. His lawyer leaned in to speak, but Diddy didn't respond. He just folded his hands, stared at the floor, and braced himself, because something irreversible was coming. The next day, the prosecution stepped forward again, this time with a curved ball. "Your Honor," the lead attorney said calmly, "in light of sealed material evidence, the defendant has requested to address the court directly." A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. The judge raised an eyebrow. Diddy's lawyer stood, already tense. "We advised against it, Your Honor." But Mr. Combs insists. The judge nodded. He turned to Diddy. "You understand anything you say may be used against you. This is an open courtroom. You are under oath." Diddy stood slowly. "I understand." Then he stepped forward, no notes, no lawyer at his side, no rehearsed statement. Just him. Raw. His voice cracked on the second sentence. "For a long time, I lived like the rules didn't apply to me." The courtroom froze. "I had money, power, silence. I built an image, a legacy, off a version of myself that wasn't completely real. Nobody moved. I surrounded myself with people who fixed things, cleaned up messes. Sometimes money did the job, sometimes other methods." A woman in the jury gasped softly. Diddy paused, looked down. When he raised his head again, his eyes were wet. Not for effect. There weren't even cameras in the room. These weren't tears for the public. There was a night, he said quietly, a meeting that should have never happened. Someone got hurt. I didn't stop it. I didn't pull the trigger. I wasn't even in the room. But I knew, and I let it happen, because fear kept me powerful. And power made me blind. Gasps rippled. No one dared speak. I've watched people I cared about carry pain I caused. I let silence become protection. I turned loyalty into control. He turned to face the jury. "You weren't supposed to hear any of this. This was never meant to come to light, but now that it has, I won't hide behind lawyers anymore." His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the podium. "I won't admit to crimes I didn't commit. But I will say this. There are things I did, calls I made, pressure I applied. And even if I'm not guilty of everything they're accusing me of, I am not innocent." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. A few people in the gallery were crying. Others just stared like they were witnessing the fall of a statue that had stood tall for too long. The judge finally broke the silence. "Mr. Combs, do you wish to formally amend your plea?" The pause was brief. Then Diddy said, clear and unflinching, "I do." What followed was instant chaos. An empire cracked from the inside. There were no cameras in that courtroom, but what Shawn Combs said that day didn't need a lens. It spread louder than any broadcast, deeper than any frame could capture. The silence that followed wasn't absence, it was aftermath. Thick, humming, like the air after lightning. Even after the gavel came down and the marshals moved in, no one really moved. They just stood there, eyes wide, minds racing, waiting for anyone to explain what had just happened, because no one No one expected Shawn Diddy Combs to say what he said, let alone say it with his own voice. The judge ordered a 15-minute recess, but no one moved for 5. When Diddy returned to the defense table, he looked smaller, not destroyed. Not broken, just stripped of performance, of pretense. The man who once walked in each day with tailored suits and invincible confidence now sat quiet, still, like someone who had finally put down something he'd been carrying for decades. His lawyers didn't speak to him. They were huddled behind him, writing, flipping through files, on the phone with aides. They weren't out of control. They were doing something worse, shifting strategy from defense to damage control across the aisle. The prosecution sat calm but changed. They'd come armed with spreadsheets, witness lists, sealed exhibits, but they hadn't come for a confession. And now the game had changed because it wasn't a full admission of guilt. But it was enough to rip through the shell of denial that had protected him for years, and it had changed the temperature of the entire trial. When the jury filed back in, they didn't look like analysts anymore. They looked like people trying to figure out just how deep a truth had to go before it buried the lies that had been stacked around it. The judge wasted no time. In light of Mr. Combs' statement, he said, the court will allow both sides to amend their closing arguments. Furthermore, we will confer with counsel regarding possible reclassification of charges. The courtroom buzzed low, involuntary. Reporters scribbled like their hands couldn't keep up. A few jurors exchanged glances, trying to understand what this meant. But outside the courtroom, the answer came quicker. That night, it leaked. 3 lines. No source, just impact. Shawn Combs has confessed partial culpability in a sealed incident tied to the Grey Room files. Federal prosecutors are preparing a supplemental case. A sentencing deal may be in discussion. By morning, the internet was wildfire. Old interviews resurfaced. Former associates posted cryptic messages. Music blogs turned into investigative podcasts overnight. Even late-night hosts stopped joking and started dissecting. Was it strategy, emotion, a play for sympathy, or the first true thing the world had ever heard from him? Inside that courtroom, none of that mattered because the rules had changed. The prosecutor leaned into the mic. Your Honor, in light of the defendant's voluntary admission, we request immediate review of all sealed exhibits and a private session to present evidence that may warrant additional charges. The judge agreed, and just like that, the trial stopped being a trial. It became a fuse, a spark, a controlled burn with no guarantee of stopping. Because when a man like Combs, who built a legacy out of airtight image and unshakable control, pulls even one thread, the whole fabric comes undone. And that courtroom, it wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was ground zero. The next morning, no one walked in casually. The press arrived before sunrise, crowding every step. Marshals doubled up at every entrance. Jurors were escorted through back hallways like protected witnesses. And inside, it felt colder. Not because of the air, but because everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was expansion. The case wasn't closing. It was spreading. Diddy sat where he always did, but he wasn't the same. His body was still, but not stiff. His eyes no longer darted around the room. They stayed low, focused, quiet. Then the judge entered, and everything shifted again. Due to the defendant's voluntary admissions and new evidence submitted by federal investigators, the judge said, "This trial is hereby formally suspended, pending further investigation. All charges are under review for escalation." The jury is released from duty. The air shattered. Gasps, murmurs, a sharp intake of collective breath, and then silence. The jurors sat stunned. Some glanced at Diddy. One last time, one nodded. Another walked out without looking back. The defense immediately requested a sealed hearing. The prosecution moved to freeze offshore assets linked to the new evidence, and just like that, the courtroom emptied. But the story, it stayed behind. Diddy didn't speak again? Not to the court, not to the hallway, not to the cameras waiting outside. He walked out with his lawyer.no sunglasses.no entourage. Just a man, silent, surrounded by marshals. Outside. The crowd didn't shout anymore. They just watched. Phones raised, cameras rolling. But the energy was different now. They weren't filming a celebrity. They were filming a reckoning. In the days that followed, federal agents served warrants. Offshore accounts were locked. NDAS, once thought buried, began appearing. Online signed, scanned, authenticated. Names began to surface. The gray room was no longer legend, it was evidence. Old drives, voice recordings, contracts, timelines. A special prosecutor was appointed, multiple grand juries convened, and the name Diddy stopped trending as a brand and started appearing in court dockets. There was no sentencing that week, no press conference, no emotional closing scene. Just the sound of something massive creaking under its own weight. What started as the trial of one man had turned into a mirror held up to an industry that had spent years protecting its giants behind walls of money, fear, and silence. And when that mirror cracked, it didn't just reflect him. It reflected everyone who looked away, everyone who took the check instead of asking the question, everyone who believed power could erase the truth. There were never any cameras in that courtroom, but the truth got out anyway, and that truth will echo far beyond the walls where it was born.